you are not immune to making these mistakes. They affect everyone. These are deep psychological truths. They are built into human nature. And as the people who are there to warn us about these dangers die off, we need to warn ourselves. Like, we've got a fugue, we've got an amnesia here. We haven't learnt these lessons properly. So we really need to go back in history by ourselves through poems, art, literature, and think, what can we learn from this? Ladies and gentlemen, 2 generations of men, soldiers, were lost during the World Wars. Not only men, but obviously the civilian casualties that are incurred due to the wars. Now, one of those generations was labelled the Lost Generation, and one of them was labelled the Greatest Generation. Think about the disparity between those 2 names. World War I soldiers, Lost Generation. World War II soldiers, Greatest Generation. Now, obviously, you've got the conventional explanations for that, but I want to dive into the more psychological explanations, right? Why is that the case? Okay, why is there a doom and gloom around World War I that we don't see when referencing World War II? Okay, and why does that affect us now? What can we harvest from that? Because let me tell you this, right? There's a lot of lessons that we can harvest from the 20th century, and not many people in the 21st century harvest hardly any of them. Okay, the 2 major important lessons, just taking them for example, is 1, communism is terrible, and 2, fascism is terrible. And we've probably learnt maybe half of that second lesson. So we've learnt maybe half a lesson from the 20th century, or the average person has at least. They kind of know that Nazis are bad. They say Nazis are bad. They say Trump's a Nazi. They say this guy's a Nazi, that guy's a Nazi. But they don't even really know what a Nazi is. Now, there's a very interesting book that I suggest you read called The Passion of Oscar Fisch. Now, this is a book in which essentially some young Germans after the end of World War II set out to do anything but be like their fathers. So their number 1 objective is to not be like the Nazis. And then, you've got 20, 30 years down the line, and all of a sudden you've got one of them separating the Jews from the non-Jews on an airline hijacking, right? And so this is a very interesting concept, right? It's the concept, the more you try to be not like the Nazis, the more you fall into the trap of potentially becoming one. And I think that's definitely a phenomenon we're seeing more and more on the political left, but even now on the far right, on the right of the spectrum, especially in wake of what's going on in Israel-Palestine and the lobbying groups that exist from Israel, right, in Western countries, and the negative tension that causes. But I suppose this is kind of besides the point. The point is, we haven't learned what we need to learn from the 20th century, even on a major level, right? With those 2 big lessons. Communism's bad, fascism's bad, so how the hell have we been expected to learn anything else on a more micro level, right? So, I'm not going to, sit here and speak about things that you, as intellectuals watching this video, most likely have probably already thought about. Communism being bad, fascism being bad. This is something you can get from anywhere on the internet. But what I am going to do is look into a more micro lesson, right, from the 20th century that I find particularly interesting and that you can apply to your life personally. Okay, so again, going back to that original point, why were the soldiers in World War I labelled the Lost Generation, right? Why were the soldiers in World War II labelled the Greatest Generation? What are the differences there? And how can we apply that? Because there is a psychological message to harvest there. How can we apply that to our lives? Gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumblings, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. Now, what I just read you was a poem by Wilfred Owen, an English soldier who passed away after World War I actually ended. But he fought in the trenches in the Western Front, right, in France, moving towards Germany, just stuck in trench warfare for many years throughout the First World War. And essentially, he was in a psychiatric institution. Okay, so he had severe PTSD. The reason he passed was, I think, slightly connected to that PTSD. And he wrote this poem that I just read you, Dulci et decorum est. And the translation, it's a French title, but the translation is actually, it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. Now, obviously, as you just saw in the poem, I mean, the poem was brutal, okay? It described a scene of soldiers being struck by a chemical attack, right? A gas attack from the German lines and essentially fumbling to fit the gas masks in time. It described Wilfred Owen, this is a real account from what I can see, seeing a comrade, a soldier, his brother in arms, just drowning in a sea of gas and just basically just perishing, right, in a brutal fashion, in an agonizing kind of fashion. Now, the 5 stanzas of the poem, and I only read you a section of it, illustrate the irregularity, right, of that whole situation. You have to remember here, just put it into context. I understand that in World War One, what we think about World War One now, it sounds normal to hear about a gas attack. It sounds normal to hear about trench warfare. This is a completely unique war. Okay, World War One, it was called the Great War for a marketing reason, but it really was great in many regards. And one of the reasons it was great is because it was the introduction of the modern military tactics. Okay, tanks, for example, chemical warfare, trench warfare. Right, we didn't have any of this before World War One in any major way. Pre-World War One, we were more as a species, I'm talking, focused on kind of structured line warfare and the whole kind of, I guess, appeal and the cosmetics of it all. You'd have Napoleon lining up against the Russian armies and fighting in almost a more artistic way. And that's, I suppose you could even refer it back to Sun Tzu's The Art of War, right? It was nowhere near as brutalistic and grungy and snide. It was much more structured and a respectful kind of format of combat, right? But then we have this situation in 1915 where the Germans, for the first time in human history, used chemical warfare, used chemical weapons, right? So that they attack in 1915 in the Western lines. The Allied forces, right, the Entente, as they called in World War One, had no idea this was coming. They were ill prepared for any sort of chemical weapons being used. And you can just see in this scene the brutalities of those first ever chemical attacks ever, and just the fumbling, the franticness. And this poem, as I may have mentioned before, has 5 stanzas. Okay, I've only read you one of the stanzas, and the irregular structure of the whole poem, if you go and read it, you've got stanzas in different lengths, stanzas with different rhyming patterns, some rhymes that don't rhyme at all, they just cut off one another, difference in volume, different in capitalization. All of these irregularities that you saw in Wilfred Owen's poem are symbolic to the kind of irregularities of World War One as a whole. Not only the situation described, but the entirety of World War One. Here's a war where one of the dramatic differences between World War One and World War Two is there was no real hatred for the enemy on any major ideological disagreement. And this is something we'll dive into in a second, but I really want to illustrate that point in what happened with the Australians and the Ottomans, because the Ottoman Empire, of course, being part of the Central Powers, and the Australians, of course, being part of the British Empire at that time, the Commonwealth, and being dragged into a war. The Australians actually established a beachhead at Gallipoli, which is in modern-day Turkey. And they fought each other. The Turks and the Australians fought each other at that time, and there was no hatred, there was no animosity between the two. You've got the founder of modern-day Turkey in 1934 saying this, and I quote, "You, the mothers who sent your sons to faraway lands to fight, wipe your tears away. Your sons now lie in our bosom and are in peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they are now our sons as well." And what that really displays is, there was no hatred between these two countries, right? They were dragged into this war for no clear, direct purpose, really. What were they fighting for? Well, they were fighting for their country, but there was no deeper explanation than that. The whole marketing around World War One was a nationalistic marketing. Furthermore, you've got more abnormalities in this war. There's a reason, again, why it was called the Great War. It wasn't called the Great War because it was big necessarily. It was all these abnormalities, all these irregularities, the modernization of the whole military in general, how warfare was conducted in general. We've got the fall of 4 separate empires: the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, the German Empire, the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. These are major things. This is a war that led to the cradle of communism, guys. Right, one of the most destructive ideologies of the 20th century as a whole, and in human history, basically. Communism is an ideology where you've got between 40 and 60 million people dead as a result of communism, right? And if you really want to understand the scale of that number, the fact that there is a 20 million person room for error between 40 and 60 million, that displays the catastrophe of that ideology on every single level. But look, it's not hard to imagine that communism came out of this war. this is a war where people were signing up for nationalistic reasons, okay? The social conditioning, the excellent marketing and propaganda on the behalf of the state. You can just imagine being a young person in this lost generation, signing up to fight for your country, willingly, lying about your age to get into combat as soon as you can, because it's a privilege to be able to fight, or at least they made it seem so. And then as soon as you get to the front lines, whether it be in France or whether it be on the Eastern Front, right? As soon as you get there, you camp up, in these trenches, in these filthy trenches infested with rats, eating 6 crackers and a bloody tin of beans per day, right? And you realise, oh no, this whole thing was one big lie. And you can see how a hatred for the elites, a hatred for the upper classes who are sitting cozy in their penthouses and their estates back at home, you can see how the hatred would form, and you can definitely see how the, I guess you could say, vengefulness or resentment would dwell that could lead to something like a communist revolution, which is exactly what happened in Russia. But then, here's where you go and compare this situation to World War II, right? So World War I, you have no direct motive for war, really. No one really knows why they're fighting. They're fighting for their country, but there's no deeper inspiration behind why they're fighting. There's no deeper core message, right? And you look at World War II, a very clear goal, right? You've got the Axis powers, the Germans who felt like they were wronged by World War I. The Jews screwed us over and they lost us the war. And then at the Treaty of Versailles, they put these ridiculous reparations on us, and their country's getting decimated by inflation. You've got kids walking around with wheelbarrows full of cash to buy loaves of bread or tins of beans. Effectively their currency's been debased to the maximal degree. Just pure hardship in every single way. And then this character, Adolf Hitler, comes along and offers you a solution to that problem. And of course, Adolf Hitler rises to power, as we know, and Nazism rises to power, of course, and anti-Semitism's on the rise. And then the Allies are looking at this situation. Okay, we've got this guy in Germany, and Germany's flaring up again. They're putting claim to all of this land. They've got this dangerous ideology. They're kicking Jewish businesses out. This is looking bad. And then, all of a sudden, you've got Japan attacking Pearl Harbor. You've got, Germany basically swarming through the Western Front in a matter of 6 weeks, just showing the absolute military dominance, okay, of blitzkrieg strategies, and just surprising the entirety of the Western world, essentially, because how did these guys rearm? We thought we put, sanctions on these guys, we thought we had reparations that would keep them down, and now here we go, 20 years later after the First World War, they're back, and they're back blazing, right, and they want revenge, they want to conquer, right? There's a clear motive there. We've got to stop these guys. These guys are kicking Jewish people out, they're putting Jewish people in ghettos, there's allegations, they're gassing them all, they're killing, there's genocide going on, they've swept through the entirety of France, they're bombing Britain, we've got the Japanese here bombing Pearl Harbor. We've got to get these guys back, we've got to save our countries. There's a clear motive there. And it goes deeper than just the kind of bland, nationalistic, idealistic kind of propaganda of World War I. It's like we are against this ideology. Not only are we saving our countries and defending our countries, but there's this guy, we don't like this guy, and he's taking everything from us, and he's going to come kill our families, right? And he's going to enslave our entire country and put us all under this fascist regime, right? There's a direct motive there. There's a clear message there. There wasn't that message in World War I, but even on a more micro level, there wasn't that message in World War I. This is something that I personally find particularly interesting. It's the intricacies of World War II that I find interesting. Just the camps, right? We look at the concentration camps in World War II, and not just what happened in the camps. We all know what happened there. The shocking, horrific, disgusting, reprehensible treatment of Jewish people from the Nazis that occurred within those camps. But even the smaller aspects of those camps, the writing on the gates is what I'm talking about. So you go into Auschwitz, Birkenau, Dachau, and you read the writing on top of the gates in German. You've got messages such as these, and these are real quotes. Right? Quote, on the gate, work sets you free. Right? A second one, endure. A third one, right or wrong, my fatherland. Right? Right or wrong, my fatherland. And this is my one which I find the most cruel, really. You will get what you deserve. Think about that for a second. Let me paint this picture for you, right? You're a Jewish man, you've got a family, you've got a wife, you've got kids, you've been in the ghettos, right? The Nazis have put you in the ghettos, they've taken everything you own, they've taken your property, all of your possessions, all of your photos, everything you have, your business. You've been in a ghetto for 3 years, whatever it may be, and then all of a sudden they come to close down the ghetto and they put you on a train and they send you to this camp. And you know what happens at the camp. You know the Jews don't come back from that camp. And immediately when you get off the train in the freezing cold winter, you're lined up, right? You're separated from your wife and children. You never see them again. You don't know you'll never see them again, but you've got an inclination of it, right? You know, your wife's screaming, no, don't let this happen. Your children are crying, everything's frantic, right? People are being shot left, right, and center who are trying, to avoid this chaos and get back to their families, getting beaten down with the end of a gun. And you're hauled through, right? You're put in a line, and at gunpoint, you're forced to walk into this encampment, this prison. You can see the starving individuals on the inside, and you look upwards at the gate, and you read, "You will get what you deserve." Absolutely sick. Now, I've spoken to Jewish people in my personal life, and I've heard the most disgusting story. It's a story that you've probably heard as well, about what they used to do to some of the Jews at Auschwitz particularly. What they did to the Jewish males when they came into the camps for the first time is they used to get them to pick up big sacks of dirt, right, heavy sacks of dirt, and got them to walk up and down the courtyard endlessly with no objective, right, until they collapsed. Right? Now think about that for a second, and think about it deeply. That's not just physical torture. That's mental torture, right? Because you have no objective in doing that, right? The thing that makes that so crushing, along with the writing on the gates, is not just, oh, okay, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, now I've got to carry this sack. It's like, no, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I've been taken away from my family. These people hate me. They say I'm going to get everything that I deserve, and now I'm carrying this sack up and down for no purpose, just basically for the enjoyment of the guards or to break my will. Right? There's no will left inside of you. And here's where we can relate back to World War One. Right? You think about World War One, there's no overarching objective. Right? So of course the overarching objective is win the war, but when you're in trench warfare, right, and there's 30 meters between your trench and the Germans' trench, right? And you know that eventually you're going to get the order, the whistle's going to blow, and you're going to have to run over the top of that trench and run 30 meters into direct gunfire through no man's land. And, eventually you get to the point where you're thinking, so what if we take their trench? It's only 30 meters away. Europe's so big, this is going to have no impact on the war. So it's almost like there's no objective. It's almost like the objective is meaningless. It's like walking up and down with the bag of dirt in Auschwitz. It's like, you're not getting any mental stimulation from this. It's killing your brain, it's killing your mindset because there's no goal. You're just doing things for the sake of doing them. There's no progression in sight. And of course, as anyone would know, who's been a human being, which I assume is all of you, unless there's a bunch of AI robots watching this, the only thing that keeps people going, and the most satisfying thing, is progression, right? People say it all the time, and I completely agree with it. You'd rather be working at McDonald's, but getting a raise and getting upwards in position, getting from the cook to the manager to the regional manager, than being a millionaire, but just being stagnant and not making any progress, right? It's progress that makes people satisfied and fulfilled. And that's why World War I was so different to World War II in another manner, right? World War I was a war of sitting in a trench for months on end until you finally got the order to go into a suicide charge to the other trench, right? World War II was a war of fast movements. Blitzkrieg, bang, France taken in 6 weeks, right? Landing in, I believe, July, I could be wrong, maybe June of 1944, and rushing through and liberating the entirety of France, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, all these countries being eliminated, Italy, and then pushing through to Berlin in a matter of less than a year. Right? It's a war of mobility. It's a war of liberation. It's a war of constant mental satisfaction, okay? Because not only are you winning this war, right, but you've got clear objectives and you're on the move, you're actually doing things, and you can see a future in which you're going to go home to your family, Unlike in World War One, right? In World War One, you've got a situation where certain defensive positions lasted throughout the entirety of the war. People didn't move. There was no movement. You're sitting in the trench for 4 years, riding back to your family at home. There's no movement. You're bored out of your minds, and you're just waiting for that gas attack to come in and for you to fumble with the mask and drown in the sea of gas, like Wilfred Owen says in the poem. Right? It's a brutal war, not only because of the physical death toll, but because of the mental aspect of it. There's no goals, there's no motive, right? And this is where we can tie it back into our personal lives. Now, what do you do when you have no goals, you have no objective, you have no prospect to build your business, your relationship, your family, whatever it may be, right? Your finances, your body, you have no prospects to go to the gym, you don't have any aspirations, or you think it's not possible for some reason, or you're depressed for some reason, and it's just not in your world, right? What do? Well, you hunt the hedonistic pleasures, right? That's the pitfall people go down into, especially when they take this nihilistic worldview, which is one of the struggles with I guess, New Age atheism, right? I personally would describe myself as an atheist or an agnostic, but I understand as well that when people lose their religious belief, they can fall very well down into these kind of hedonistic, nihilistic death traps, really, because that's what they are. I mean, not only are they killing you mentally, but they're killing you physically, they're killing you socially, living for the clubs, drinking ridiculous amounts, taking certain drugs, and not all of those things are bad. Of course, some things are okay in moderation. Like, I'm not going to lynch anyone for having a drink, of course not, but I'm saying that when you have nothing else going on, and you're using it as an escape mechanism, you're using these hedonistic pleasures to get any sort of pleasure in your mind, because you can't get pleasure from any actual meaningful endeavor. Of course, this is a bad thing, right? And not only is this an opinion, it's a psychological fact. And not only is it a psychological fact, I mean, this is a truth that is built into human DNA, essentially, right? You look at the biblical stories. You look at Cain and Abel, right? And the Bible, say what you will about the Bible is got such strong psychological truths that it's just almost incomprehensible that someone could have written it. Now, obviously, I believe someone did write it, but I can understand why religious people would sometimes doubt that and think it's manifested by God or something like that, right? I understand that case, because some of these truths in the Bible are just so built into the human consciousness that it's really unbelievable. We've got the Cain and Abel story, and what is the Cain and Abel story? Well, I mean, everyone knows it, right? But I'll explain it to you briefly. You've got two brothers, right? One's Cain, one's Abel. Abel's making certain sacrifices and he's getting rewarded for it. He's got the women, he's got the money, he's got the livestock, he's got the good harvest coming through from his farms, whatever it may be, right? You name it, he's got it. And his brother, Cain, he's putting in what he thinks is equal effort. He's making the same sacrifices, at least in his view, the same sacrifices. Turns out he's actually not, but he thinks he is. And he's getting filled with resentment because he's not getting rewarded by God in the same way. His harvests are bad, his livestock are plagued and sick, he's not getting the women, he's not getting the money, he's not getting any of this thing, right? And he's getting resentful, right? And in a moment of just pure resentment and rage after, I don't know how long, maybe years of this going on, of what he deems to be unfair treatment by God, he goes and kills his brother, right? He goes and kills Abel, which is a great sin, of course, and he curses humanity for it, right? His offspring, of course, being cursed for it. Now, if this isn't a psychological truth, I don't know what is, right? And if this isn't a demonstration of what could be happening in the world right now, I do not know what is. Think about the world right now, right? Think about, for example, on the political left, and I don't want to just trash on leftists, because I understand this happens on the right as well, but think about on the political left, the system's against us, right? It's capitalism that's bad, it's these Elon Musk that's against us here, and resentment building and building and building. You have to remember, it's much easier to tear things down than it is to build things up, right? And this resentment is not a stable scaffolding for which to base your endeavors from, to which to make your goals from. You cannot make your goals, right, based on the scaffolding that is resentment. You have to make your goals based on the scaffolding, which is gratitude, which is exactly what Abel did. And that's exactly why in the biblical stories, Abel was rewarded and Cain was not. Cain was shunned and cursed, right, after he took that reprehensible action and killed his brother. So what is the message here? The message here is that gratitude leads to fulfillment, okay? Gratitude leads to you building that base that you you need to build in order to actually succeed and be satisfied with your life. The goal cannot be happiness. The goal cannot be hedonism. The goal has to be fulfillment and legacy, right? And how can we relate that back to World War One and World War Two? Well, we got the whole message from World War One and World War Two. We looked at what happened in World War One. We looked how they had no goals, they had no overarching purpose, right? Yes, of course, they didn't fall into the pitfalls of hedonism because there's a different context, but the whole point is they had no objective. With no objective, their mental states deteriorated. Why do you think people were shell-shocked at massive rates? Why do you think Wilfred Owen, the guy who wrote the poem that I read to you, died in a psychiatric ward? Okay, these are deep truths. Why do you think they're called the Lost Generation instead of World War II, where they're called the Greatest Generation? They didn't have goals. The ones in World War II did. They had justifiable goals and easily marketable goals, not only on an establishment to citizen-based level, but also for the citizens to justify it to themselves. And it led to their success through history, right? We read the history books now and we think of these men as men who were accomplished, right? Men who felt good about themselves. Obviously, some of them had PTSD. Obviously, war is terrible and many of them died, but it's a much different point of view to take the Greatest Generation versus the Lost Generation. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.